We're glad that you can all join us for our event tonight. My name is Lily. I'm one of the campus pastors here in Every Nation, London. So me and Dan will be hosting you for tonight's event. And first and foremost, I'm just so encouraged of seeing each and every one of you here. I know if we'll have the time, and all of you have your own testimonies and stories to share of how God has called you in the nation that you're in. Um, Today, we're really up to encourage you on the work that you're doing. So I do want to call on Dan to share some word of encouragement for everybody.
Hi, everybody. So good to see you. I'm so thankful you could join us this evening. I just wanted to really speak up as an Englishman. Now, my accent has become every nationized over the years. Now, I sometimes have English people asking me where I'm from. England. I grew up in Sussex, in the southeast of England, but I actually grew up in a small English village in Surrey and then Sussex in the early 1980s. And it was exceptionally rare in that context to encounter anyone who didn't look like me and sound like me. It was very rare at the time to go abroad for holiday, certainly in my family. The first aeroplane I ever went on was when I was married to my wife, and we went on a trip. There wasn't even a honeymoon. Yet somehow from an early age, God seems to have had a deliberate design to place me in environments where there are people from other nations and other cultures. When I was young, I went to a private school that I got into via academic scholarship. There would be no other way that I would have been able to go there. And it was full of rich, upper-class English people who I had nothing in common with, I felt, and full of international students. And then I went to university in London, the most diverse place in the world, through to meeting Wolfie, our senior pastor, on campus in London, joining an Every Nation church. I graduated and I worked for a North American company. My life has been transformed profoundly by the nations, by Africans, Asians, Americans, Europeans, all of these people from all of these different backgrounds. And I am an Englishman. So I want to speak with authority and say that what you have in you is powerful. And especially in recent years, my life has been enriched and blessed and transformed, particularly by Filipinos. For a number of years now, we have, as a movement, we've kind of talked about it. I don't know who still does it, but I still do it. We have a Matthew 9:28. I have a 9:28 alarm on my phone that goes off every day to pray for laborers. Matthew 9:28. Is when Jesus looks at the harvest and he says to his disciples, the fields are ripe to harvest, but the laborers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest to send the laborers into the harvest field. We've been praying this for our churches. We've been praying this for Europe. We've been praying this for our campuses. And since we've been praying, God has been bringing laborers from all sorts of different nations. And as you know, many of them, maybe even most of them are Filipino. And I believe God has a very intentional plan for that. Because as an Englishman, again, I speak with authority and I say that what I have discovered in Filipino believers is a powerful thing. And it's powerful for reaching me and people like me, our culture. So I believe there's very exciting things available. But also I've been talking to Lily, I've been talking to Filipinos in my leadership group and others I know, and I'm trying to understand, like, Lily, tell me, what does it take for these people who I believe to be some of the most amazing disciples and leaders that I have met? What does it take for them to reach non-Filipinos? And that's what we want to help you with, really, honestly, because I fully believe that God has called you and appointed you to bear fruit. He's called you and appointed you to go, not just to Filipinos in this nation, but to this nation. And I believe as well that many people from different cultures, and many people from my culture will experience what I have experienced, that there is something about the love, the generosity, the community, the relational nature, the just passion for God, and so much that is in this culture. And we'll kind of look into and break down some things, but so much of what you have is a blessing to us and a blessing to the nation. So that's the purpose of tonight, to help you be equipped and empowered to go in the strength you have. That's what God said to Gideon, right? When he thought, like, I'm the least, I have, this small band of people and I don't have anyone. Who am I? And he says, go in the strength you have. So we want to empower you to go in the strength you have to continue to reaching Filipinos. It's amazing to see the people that we have been saved and added. But also, I've got to be honest, my heart beats for this nation, for people like me, for English people, for European who are dark and who are lost and who need Jesus. So I want to tell you that with authority as an Englishman, that you have what it takes in God to go. And tonight we want to help you understand some of the dynamics of that and how we can break down any barriers so that you can be equipped and empowered to go. So that is my brief exhortation to you.
Thank you so much, Dad. We do want to start, I think, this event with just prayer. I'm just so encouraged at seeing all the names here and the churches that are represented. Lord, we just commit to you this time. Lord, we thank you that you have called us out of our own nation into the nations that we are here today. Thank you that you are the God of the nations, Lord, that you have all called us to go and make disciples of all nations. Lord, today I commit the hearts of these people, Lord God, these faithful laborers, Lord God, who are believing for breakthroughs, Lord God, whether it's in their own family, in their own community, in the city that they are serving, or even in their workplace, Lord. Lord, today we just lay down our hearts, Lord God, before you. And Lord, I pray that tonight, Lord, you would equip us, you would encourage us, you would inspire us, and that you would challenge us, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. So I'm very confused on say tonight, this morning, this afternoon, because people are on different time zones. But I'll just use our BST time. So for tonight, I'm very privileged to introduce to you one. This person is actually my classmate from the School of World Missions. So for those of you who know Cherry and Kit as well, Cherry, Kit, and Ria have been classmates since 2006 from the School of World Mission in the Philippines. Ria has been one of my mentors when I was still back in the Philippines before she went and served to our Every Nation Church in Seattle. And last year, we've just reconnected again because she was telling me of her new job and how exciting it is that she was doing a doctorate study of how Filipinos can be empowered to thrive in serving in the global north. And so I have been part of a lot of her exercises and these webinars as well. It has been super helpful for me to have a language, to be equipped with strategies, and at the same time to have a different framework and mindset. And that's why I did ask her, like, Ria, can you do I know you're doing a lot of these seminars, but can you do it for us as well? So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to call on Dr. Ria Martin.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, babes. I still call her babes. I know her as babes, but in the context of, in her new context, it's Lily. But man, I'm so excited to see everyone. There are some familiar faces. I recognize Richard, and I think I saw Rita earlier too. But yeah, Thank you for inviting me, Pastor Danielle and Pastor Lily. As you know, Lily introduced me. I'm currently based in Seattle. I met my husband here. He is from the Pacific Northwest. So I am in an intercultural marriage, which is very exciting. All the things that I learned, I'm telling you, I sort of applied it, in my marriage first and like kind of work it out. Very insightful. So it was really fun. And yeah, I've been serving in campus ministry for 15 years, both in the Philippines and some short-term mission trip in Asia, until God called me to move to Seattle in 2012. So I've been here for 10 years in campus ministry for 8 years. So if we're talking about Filipinos in the context of, in Filipinos in Europe, okay? We know that Philippines is the 13th most populated country globally. Scholars and historians projected that Philippines will become a home to the third or fourth largest number of Christians in the planet by 2050. These are by Jenkins, Knowles, and all the other historians. Just imagine and sit with me that in 2050, Philippines will become the third or the fourth largest Christian communities in the planet by 2050. Regionally, Europe hosts the most massive immigrant population worldwide. At the country level, it's in the United States. In other words, we Filipinos will continue to outgrow sending missionaries only in Asia or within our region. Why? Because along with that, because of that projection and the statistics that that missiologist has been looking at and studying at for this, for this whole entire time. We will continue to reach beyond the borders of Asia. We will send, you are already in Europe, in the context of Europe, but our story is not going to end here. We will see more missionaries that will be sent or will have a heart for Europe and North America. If this is the case, what would be our legacy as Filipinos in the global North? What is our contribution to world missions if this is going to be the trend? And one of my participants in my dissertation, my dissertation is specific for Filipinos, first generation Filipinos that are in the global North in missions. One of my participants said, like, she saw herself being involved in the global North because he said there's just a high leadership momentum in the Philippines, but there is almost like no more land to conquer, and there's this strong heart to reach other nations, including regions in Europe. It's ever increasing. If our training in the Philippines is to reach nations, while we were in the Philippines, right, we're passionate about nations, to reach nations. We are passionate about doing that. Our training is all about doing that. Why is it that when we arrive in other nations like the global North, we only reach our own kind? Is it the motivation? Is it the strategy? Is it the approach? Is it us? Is it the perception of the whole city? But why is that? So this is the one that triggered me to do this dissertation, to study, because I know, like what Pastor Daniel was saying, there's so much more Filipinos can offer and contribute in the global North. But somehow when we immigrate to rich nations in particular, we congregate within our own kind. For instance, in the US, okay, there is such a clamor for diversity where I'm at. But however, 97.5% of US churches here still remains monocultural or homogeneous. Diversity is such a high demand. Who else can model diversity better than the church that Jesus is expecting when he returns, that he describes in Revelation, right? That every tribe, every tongue. So I guess for us, does it matter who we reach? Are we reaching based on our own cultural preference? Are we limited to that? Um, does our cultural orientation, whether intentional or unintentional, prohibits us from reaching all nations, including logos, who are our neighbors in this context? Like many of you who are in this meeting, the heart, I don't doubt the heart and the passion to reach other nations, but oftentimes there are invisible boundaries, like our cultural orientation, that prohibits us from reaching all nations. So this is just one of the examples that I was telling you about Christians in context. Okay, so in 1990, Christians by continent, majority 82% are coming from the north. Okay, this is by Dr. Todd Johnson, who's the chair of Mission in Global Christianity. I attended one of his workshops, and this is what it looked like, Christians by continent in the 1900s. This is what it looks like, Christians by continent in 2020. Look where we're at. Majority of the Christians are in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. The scholars uses the term reverse missions. That means, even Philippines and Asia, like I said, if there's a high population of Christians in our region, it is inevitable that we will be going to the global north. Inevitable that we will be going to Europe. Places that when I moved here to Seattle, the questions that I faced were, why are you going to the US? Why are you not going into missions to poor nations? Isn't that what all missions is all about? You just go, you go to poor nations to like Asia and Africa. At the time, I didn't have an answer, honestly, because, it wasn't a very popular story then. This is 10 years ago. And I'm sure that has shifted gradually. So like my story, I told you that, I was a campus missionary here in 2012. I moved here. And I remember, I was setting up, you guys familiar with God test, like the spiritual test survey from Dr. Rice, Brooks. I was so excited to use it for the first time. So by the way, I was the only, campus staff at that time. So I was carrying all these tables and all, food that you want to lay on the table and like kind of attract the students to come into your table and take the test. And I was so shocked that the students, taking the test, they would ask me if, I have apples and bananas for their, for their day to give away. And they asked me like, are those organic? I'm like, what do you, I'm like, so like, doesn't matter. So I was shocked. Like they were asking me if it's organic. I have sodas, laid out on the table again, like sodas. Hello, it's like vitamins. And then for them, they asked like, oh no, we'll just take the test, but we won't take the soda. I'm like, why? You're a college student. You're supposed to just take anything that was given to you for free. And then they said, oh, no, like that. Oh, soda is like poison. Like poison? Like I love soda any time of the day. And then when I started hosting, gatherings, they would ask me if I would have gluten-free options, vegan options. And I said, I'm not your caterer, What a way to answer, right? I said, I'm not your caterer. If you want to have something else, bring your own food, but we're going to have this. And then, but slightly, I was getting more and more offended about the Filipino recipes that I've been presenting, that is not as popular as I would imagine them to be. Towards the end, we ended up with just having vegetarian options for everybody, just because it caters to everyone. It's funny, what was happening was I was bringing in my cultural orientation to how I approach missions. That's just how it is. I knew this worked for our culture in the past. Maybe this will work here. So I tried it. I didn't have any intercultural training then when I left, because when we were in Asia, most of our trainings were geared towards other Asians, regions that we're familiar with. Okay, but it was unheard of for a Filipino to become a missionary to a rich nation. When I say global north, that means rich and wealthy nations, like where you're at, in the US. The things that I will be sharing with you are not just pure research. There's a lot of experiences here that was common among the participants. These experiences or research, are from first generation Filipino missionaries who wants to leave a legacy of mission for all peoples, particularly in the global north. The heart, like I said, the heart, no doubt, has always been there. This is also what I'm sharing is like based on the ebb and flow of statistics, and that it's here to stay. Like what I talk about reverse mission, that's the scholar says it's going to be irreversible. It's gonna be here for a long time. But like what Pastor Daniel said, what's our legacy? As Filipinos, how do we participate in global missions? What would be our legacy if we realize the giftings that God has placed on us? What would be our legacy in global missions? One of also the interesting things I realized when I moved here is that I avoided using "this is how I do it in the Philippines." Day one I landed, I did not use the term "this is how we do it in Victory Philippines," because it's not going to be the same, and I'm entirely in a new context. In my research, some of the frustrations are, why is it not working here? I've seen it in the Philippines, it's working there, and like, why is it not working here? And we're realizing I can't just copy paste what I was doing in the Philippines. And then they're saying, I just really have to figure things out, and then some of the questions were like, how do I share the gospel from a place of poverty to a wealthy nation when everything that they need was given? Right? That's why, when we talk about missions in poor countries, like we know, okay, they need this, they need that, and then we come in and like we share the gospel. But then we come to the global north, everything is just like settled. They have the government to take care of their needs. They have their cluster of friends. So like even starting like to make friends, like it's hard because, I already have friends, So these are some of the questions. And understanding that Filipinos, we do have gifts, we are resilient, we're hard workers, we're joyful, we're bold in sharing our faith, but we also meet some challenges in our context. Something new that we did not encounter back home when it comes to discipleship, because we are monocultural, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Global North is intercultural. Some of the participants that I interviewed, they said the moment you step out, on the street, you would hear 40 different languages. How do we do missions now that we're surrounded with so many different cultures? And we are highly relational. This has been proven. There are literatures that would back us as Filipinos that we are relational genius. We just know how to be relational. So how do we use that in our new context? During my interviews, like I said, these are some of the questions that emerge when we talk about intercultural challenges. Okay, there's the concept of time. How do you share the gospel to a community that has no time for new friends? Right? We're just talking about engaging. You're very, very beginning of the first part of E. Engage the culture and the community. You meet someone, and before it was easy to like, do you guys want to have coffee? And they were like, what do you mean? What do you mean hang out? Like, like there's so much, it's kind of like puzzling. The other question is about trust. How do you build a community, a relationship to a community when there is no trust? Because trust is, we know that as relational cultures, if we spend time with them, it will build trust. If once they trusted us, then we can share the gospel. So all this is leading towards sharing the gospel and becoming an effective evangelist. But then we're already faced with the first two. They don't have time. And then the trust is not there yet. Okay, because cultures have different ways of building trust. There's task-based cultures and then there are relational-based cultures. And that could be, explained later on. Degree of interdependence. How do you reach an individualistic or independent community? And then intercultural communication. How do I understand discipleship? It's very different from my host city, especially, and I will explain this later on. So for today, I will concentrate on time and context. How do we understand differences in intercultural communication? So before I move on, again, when you hear me talk about the global north are developed, wealthy nations from North America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. They are often known as the West or First World. It is a socio-economic status that rather than a geographical identity, because Australia and New Zealand are not part of the global north geographically, but they're located within the southern hemisphere, but because they're first world, they are part of the global north. Now, if you're from the Philippines, I avoid using the term global south. I use the majority world because the majority world focuses on emphasizing on the population rather than the socioeconomic status. So that's just like our terminology. So when you hear me say global north, that is your context. You're included in that. And when I say majority world, that's Filipinos and other developing nations. So context. This is the first intercultural challenge. When we talk about context, it plays a major role in communication. It determines the meaning. Who are involved in the communication? The one who's talking and the one who's receiving, right? What is the setting of an event? Context provides meaning to the message, and it's critical because it communicates something to the receiver, whether implied or not. So intercultural communication is contextual. The boundaries set by the messenger, verbal or nonverbal, might be different from the receiver. Okay, example, would you like to have some coffee with me? This question, if you put it in different contexts, could mean so many different ways. Okay, my husband, we have this routine to have coffee every morning. If my husband asked me this question very early morning, my answer would always be yes. It's almost like he wouldn't even have to wait for my answer. It's, it's well understood between the people who are in dialogue, where we sit and have coffee. And I also know it's not just literally having coffee. We're having our morning chat every day, what we expect from each other, how can we support each other during the day because we're both working. Right? So it determines this question, depending on who's talking and the setting, determines the meaning. Now, if I change the setting to two singles who met at church and one asked this, it means probably very different. That means I would like to get to know you. And it's not necessarily coffee. It might be lunch, it might be pastry, it might be dinner. The context provides the meaning. Okay. Now we each have our own context. These are brought about by our own experiences, norms, behavioral patterns, shared history, shared struggle, shared culture, and shared humor. Look at this scenario at the international airport. Okay, Just look at it for a minute. What do I do now? When is he going to take my card? Oh gosh, he's so unfriendly. And then the guy was like, whoa, you're too close. And then the second one, just like the last one, just like don't know how to react. And this is just a greeting. Okay, it shows that we bring in our context to the situation. And it's very possible that the one that you're talking to has a very different context than yours. It's not very possible. It is different from Filipinos to the global north. This is a simple illustration, like I said, that we bring our context to wherever we go, how we go about life, and certainly how we engage in missions. Okay. All right. So context, there are two, when I explain this, I don't want you to think about versus, okay, or against one culture against the other. I want you to think of it in relation to other cultures, the cultures. So interculturalist determines that there are two sides of context, those who operate in high context or low context. In high context, most of the information is internalized. Okay, very little is explicitly said or transmitted. Who said it is important, and how it is being said, and what is left unsaid. The meaning is deduced from contextual cues and nonverbal signals, shared knowledge, and implicit impressions. Because there's so much shared experiences, it's not necessary to discuss every single detail, right? It's like Filipinos. You just nod your head and the other Filipino nod, his or her head, and you somehow get it immediately because there's shared context. For high context, good communication is sophisticated, it's nuanced, it's layered. Messages are both spoken and read between the lines. The author of Culture Map, Erin Mayer, she calls it reading between the air. Okay, reading between the air. A high context message is one in which most of the information is internalized by the person. And while very little is in the coded, explicit, transmitted message. So most is implicit and not spoken. I think that's true. Only a small fraction of the message is verbalized and thus made explicit. Not only what is said is important, who said it, how it is being said, but also what is left unsaid. Okay, Filipinos, we are high context. And I'll give more examples later. Low context, meaning is explicitly communicated verbally, written down. It focuses on what is being said and less on how. Feelings are less important, they're linear, they're straight to the point, and it's preferred communication. Ambiguity or unclear communication is for them misleading. If you don't explicitly say that or verbalize it, it's misleading. Now this is, I'm sure when I start talking about this, you're probably having, some of the experiences, whether at your workplace and your coworkers, and you're like, wait a minute, yeah, I've seen this, I've seen this before. So for low context, it breaks trust if it's not verbalized, if you're not clear about what you're meaning or what you're trying to say. For them, good communication is precise, it's simple, it's clear. Messages are expressed and understood at face value. Repetition is appreciated. After the meeting, here's the minutes of the meeting. Send, resend, follow up, clarify, boom, right? And then sometimes for high context, you leave the meeting, okay, you got this, okay. We're done with the meeting. Bullet points is enough. You can already sense what are some of the intercultural, miscommunication that could take place. Messages are for low context. Again, messages are expressed and understood at face value. Like I said, repetition is appreciated. It is mainly about what is said and less on how. Their preference is linear and straight to the point. If it's not clear, it is considered misleading. Example, you go to a place, you're asking for directions. Okay, if you go to high context cultures, all that they would tell you is that you just look for Jollibee and you will not miss it. It's just right there. It's color yellow. Everybody gets it except the one who's from low context. Like, where, where they said I won't miss it. Okay. And they just missed it. But if you ask for directions from a low context, man, just Google the website, how to go to their church. Approximately 2 minutes from here, third block with four stoplights, parking space, every detail that you need to go to church. It's there. Precise, simple, straightforward, clear. It's funny. Past the stoplight, you won't miss it. And then everybody just, they just miss it. So this is very different. Sometimes I look at, shows, how very different shows are. You look at soap operas of, or Koreans or Japanese that are high context. They have so many pauses, still nonverbal communication. They're just staring for maybe 5 minutes of the time. And then somehow they understood. And then you end up crying because nothing was spoken, but you get the point, and then you watch other shows, direct, spoken, precise. So it's actually, very interesting. Here's one obvious way if you want some kind of a measurement. The culture map by Erin Mayer, decoding how people think, lead, and get things done across cultures. She said there are invisible boundaries that divide the world, whether you acknowledge it or not. She specializes in intercultural training for businesses. Even business leaders are going into this intercultural competency because they know if they want to be a global leader, they need to understand cultures. Because there's not one way of doing business, there are cultures that we have to consider. Whenever you travel to a foreign country, you pick up contextual cues that help you understand the culture of people living there. For example, in my first few times here, I was so shocked that people were opening their laptops on the bus. Like, whoa, isn't it going to be stolen? They're working at the bus, public places. Please note though, that when I talk about culture, it just means that it's defined as the collective patterns of interaction. Okay, anthropologies and social researchers, they study the patterns of interaction of a certain group, and that's how they come up with this. But it doesn't mean that every single individual is bound by that cultural orientation. Okay, so let's not use our cultural leaning or orientation as an excuse that this is actually how I behave as an individual. Because remember, my motivation for this dissertation is how do we engage in missions? To understand our cultural leaning and the cultural leanings of others, but to never use that as an excuse so that I won't engage in missions. Oh yeah, we're always high context, so I'm just high context. Okay, that's not what this means. This is for us to understand so we can overcome the challenges. This is funny because I think I was sitting next to my husband when we were attending a workshop by Erin Mayer, and we just saw how far apart we are. Like, whoa, look at our communication, intercultural communication challenge right there. I'm so far in the high context, low context. And by the way, that's why I said in relation to, because Japan is over here to the right. So for Japanese, we are low context than them. Okay, and so is Korea. Okay, Potential misunderstanding between the two. Okay, I'm sure you've already had those in your mind. Low context cultures values clarity and repetition for clarification. For low context. For high context, when they do this, sometimes it feels like they're talking to us like a child, right? Because we think, I already get it. Like, why does he keep saying it? Why? Like I said, I'm just exposing what are the potential conflicts that may arise. But know that that's just their value. They value repetition and clarity. They're not talking to us like we're child, but it does feel like that. Okay. It focuses on on what is being said. So when they ask us a question, sometimes it's hard for us to explain because, like I said, we have a lot of nonverbal and implied forms of communication. So it would take a lot of practice to actually learn to verbalize and communicate clearly what we wanted to say. So sometimes when we say, well, what is discipleship? If you grew up in, if you've been part of Victory Philippines, we know discipleship. Okay. We know how, because it focuses on how, right? We experience it in the Philippines. But if you were asked by low context, so what is actually discipleship? It's hard for us to put it in one full sentence because there's so much context underneath that we can't just put in one line. Effective communication here's one thing. High context, us, if we become a dominant culture, there could be a lot of cultural exchanges that would leave others out. Because we have shared experiences, shared history, shared humor. It's so easy to just communicate between us. But if there are other cultures there, we have the potential to just be within or among us, and then unknowingly we're leaving others out because we know we have to explain, oh yeah, there's this joke that we know, and then you have to explain it, right? But notice that if we are dominant in that specific group, we are potentially leaving others out. I know that's not the intention, but that's just how it will be perceived. Effective communication for low context is clarity. For high context cultures, it's listening. For low context, silence is actually awkward, but for us, it's okay. Like I said, just watch soap operas. There's so many silent, quietness in there, but we're comfortable with that. Understand that nonverbal is also part of communication. When we say communication, there's both verbal and nonverbal communication. High context oftentimes misunderstood as intentionally withholding an information. Okay, but we're not. Sometimes it's just hard to really explain it. So this is one area of growth that we want to learn, especially if we're in the global context. Oh, they appreciate clear communication. They appreciate simple, clear communication. I will try that. I will relearn that. Let me tell you, when I was raising my partnership team here in the US, all these communication breakdown happened all at the same time, because the way I do my partnership team in the Philippines is very different from the way I have to do partnership team here in the US, talking about clarity, simplifying my intentions, how to, set up meetings with, a specific time frame. I just have a lunch period. Would that suffice? And so you have to present your partnership team in like an hour or less than an hour, because that's their lunch break. All right. So when it comes to discipleship, okay, when we ask what is discipleship, this is This could be a very clear picture for you guys for between low context and high context. Okay, in my research for Filipinos and other nationalities on high context cultures, remember that discipleship, the phrase discipleship is relationship, came from lived or shared experiences. Before the phrase happened, or before we coined the term discipleship is relationship, this has been mentored, shared, lived. People grew up in this culture. So that knowledge emerged from shared life experiences that's been passed on and modeled for them. Before this phrase became popular, it was lived and modeled, talked about, and witnessed for years. It became a cycle that became a lifestyle. So if a low context asks you what exactly is discipleship, it is embedded with tons of references, okay? Underneath, contextual cues, weight of experiences. Somehow it is unnecessary to explicitly verbalize and explain it. Why? Because we know and understand how to make disciples. It's like, well, we just do it. We just do it. Just a quick story. When my sister and I went to Alaska cruise, we started talking about iceberg because that's all you really wanted to see when you go to Alaska. And we're so excited about seeing iceberg. At one point when we were having lunch, one of the crew was talking about iceberg and said, "Oh, we can't wait to actually see icebergs." And then one of the crew said, "Yeah, actually we feel the icebergs because our sleeping quarters are beneath the cruises. So every time an iceberg hits them, they know, So when we talk about icebergs, we have two different understanding. I focuses on what is seen, and the crew focused on what was unseen below. So a tourist is more concerned about the visible portion of the icebergs from the photos, right? But the seafarers and crews whose living quarters are at the bottom part of the ocean, the bottom part of the iceberg becomes their reality. When we talk about discipleship, high and low context are talking from two different realities, okay? The conflict happens is because the top cannot see the bottom. For high context, we say, well, I've seen this before. I've done this before in the Philippines. Thousands were baptized. Thousands were baptized. It's just like how it is. You're talking about from your own experience. But when you talk to someone who is based in the global north and in Europe, their reality, what is seen, this country is hard, which is true. This country is hard. It's, we've tried this and that. So what is going on? The low high context, we're sharing based from our experience, which is a major part of our reality. But the low context is also sharing from what is seen, what they have been seeing, that it is really a hard city. We've tried this and this. So there is an intercultural conflict because we're just reasoning based on two different areas of philosophies. Okay. The reality, like I said, from the global north is based on what is seen. This is a hard city. It's a difficult place to share the gospel. Meanwhile, Filipinos from reason, from lived experiences, how it came to be. I've seen this before. Thousands were baptized. God can do it again. Our truth formation is based on reality by the former and lived experiences by the latter. Remember, in their reality, they did not experience what you had experienced. So how do you bridge that gap? How do we bridge that gap? All right, I know I've said a lot of things. I just want to give a quick pause here before I talk about the value of time, which is, just really, just a really short slides. But I just want to pause, take a short break, maybe 30 seconds, catch up with your thoughts. If you have any questions, maybe write it down. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the second intercultural challenge, which is the value of time. Okay, time, you're like, who are these weird looking people or photos in my slide? Let me introduce you to them. Okay, so first, chronemics, the study of time and communication, is classified into two. When you say chronemics, the study of time and communication, the monochronous and the polychronous. Okay, in Greek, the chronos means clock time. And in pre-Socratic philosophy, Chronos is the personification of time, often referred to as the father of time. It is depicted as an old man with a long white beard. They operate in deadlines, precision, conciseness, and punctuality. They usually suffer from lack of time, and their pet peeve is waiting. Scheduled appointments are preferred rather than spontaneity. Activities are filtered if it is worth their time or if it is time consuming. So imagine when you ask them, they filter, is this time consuming or is this time, worth their time? Their common expression is time is gold, time is money, so they don't like wasting time. Remember, their activities are filtered if it's worth my time. The second type is the polychronous, time that becomes ripe with waiting. There's a waiting aspect. In Greek mythology, Kairos is the personification of opportunity, luck, and favorable moments. He is depicted with only one lock of hair, easily seized upon arrival, but once passed, no one could grasp him, for the back of his head is bald. If the moment has passed, no one can bring back time. So one also has missed the opportunity. So for them, waiting is neutral. It's not a waste of time for them. Societies in polychronous time are very adaptable and flexible, and they can sometimes just drop everything that is on their plate. For them, time is fluid, respected, and not to be disrupted. So if you're a professor and you're teaching in an intercultural setting, you would notice that the cultures that are operating in, the time is polychronous, they would wait for the perfect time to actually raise their hands and be noticed by the professor, because for them, time is not to be interrupted, right? You can just like walk out. Societies in polychronous time are very adaptable and flexible. Time is fluid, respected, and not to be disrupted. Waiting for the right time is a value, and maintaining good social relations is essential for performing. If they have good social relationships within their work structure, they perform well. Can you identify which one are we? Our cultural orientation is leaning towards, or can you tell where you lean the most? Again, when we say monochronous, the father of time is here, Time is gold, time is money. We operate in thin deadlines, punctuality, precision. These countries are mostly from low context cultures, from the global north, okay? Polychronos, personification of opportunity, luck and favorable moments. Time is respected and not to be disrupted. Time is fluid, adaptable. Time becomes ripe with waiting. These are countries mostly from high context cultures. I have one participant in my research who started inviting, like students. She was a campus missionary, and then he said, hey, do you want to have coffee sometime? Okay, so she's engaging, the first E of discipleship, engaging the culture that she's in. She started asking if she can have coffee. And the student immediately pulled out her calendar and asked where, when, what time. But the Filipino campus missionary was just casually, casually talking. And she said she remembered that lesson very well, that when she invites a student, her intention is backed up by details. Oh yeah, there's a nice spot here. Are you, this time and this time? So because they appreciate that, because remember, time for them, they're filtering time. Is this worth my time, or is this time consuming? I remember when I was doing my dissertation, and my professor would ask me, call me at 2:00. At 1:55 or 58, I'm staring at my phone, waiting for the clock to hit 2, and then I call. And he said, Ria, you are continuously surprising me. You're not acting in your Filipino time. Imagine Filipinos, we're known for around the world, we're known for Filipino time. What does that Filipino time mean? We're late, right? And he was surprised, like, Ria, you're always, you're surprising me. You're calling on time. And I remember doing that because moving in here in the global north, I'm aware that that's how other people perceive Filipinos when it comes to time. And I just, I don't want that. I just refuse to accept that, especially as, an international student here in the US, where, you have to be on top of your deadlines and requirements. But the thing about time is that how we manage time reflects who we are. Like some of those examples that I mentioned to you, like how my professor perceived me as a Filipino. OFW workers, in my research, is one of the most effective in missions because their workplace is their platform. They have shown that they are hardworking, they're diligent, and they're on time. And because of that, that made them very effective missionaries in their workplace. They're able to gain the trust of their employers because of their work ethics. Okay, if you have a workplace, if you're working there in the global north, we do that, right? Like, we're on top of things. We show good work ethics. But what about when we engage in missions? How do we handle time? Because time is a reflection of who we are. How can we use that to become an effective, to effectively engage, missions in our global context? Is that time is an invisible language or form of communication. That language and those assumptions, they change across cultures. And Ballard, who is also an expert in chronemics, how you handle time is a measurement of virtue of a person. Since the Industrial Revolution, time and punctuality became an adversarial and disciplining force, in that how you handle time is a measurement of a virtue as a person. For Filipinos, initially were perceived as always late, maybe even lazy. When we invite people for a meal, it's our cultural orientation or for, when we engage in missions, right? Like we always, we have food first, which is very understandable in our culture. Then somebody from the low context comes in like, oh, when do we start? Because, you said it starts at 6 o'clock, and you come in and like, everybody's having a party. But like, that's a shared cultural orientation that is not common in the global north. Because for them, like, well, you said we're going to start at 6, so there's already a miscommunication, right? What can we do in the future? However, okay, experts in chronemics, in time and communication, pointed out that clock is an organizing and coordinating tool to foster human relationships to achieve something together. When we falsely see time as an external entity rather than something we create, the fear of not being punctual can easily put us into a flight or fight mode. Okay, that's the other side of, that's the other side. We're sweating and nauseated and aggressive when we're late for work or behind a project. The Ballard said, it's not the wild animal that is chasing us now, as it did our earliest ancestors. It is the unforgiving clock. So how do we use our relational aspect as Filipinos in relation to this? Our cultural orientation influences how we engage in missions. It affects our approach to missions, our strategies, and what we measure as successful mission engagement. Evangelism and discipleship, because in reality, forming relationships take time. And the reward for following Christ is not always measurable from an earthly perspective. So because we're also relational cultures, we know that building relationship takes time. And actually, the interculturalists say, if we are able to move, if we are able to see global north context in terms of relational value, which takes time, the trust is forged much longer than what is than just like doing tasks together. So in the long run, relational pays, it pays dividends. In the long run, it's beneficial for us to encourage relational activities. But what I'm sharing is this is the first, this is how we encounter them first. So to know that and what to do next, is very crucial in your context. Lastly, part of my dissertation, there's a whole chapter on theology of missions. I believe that someone's theology of missions, that determines how we approach missions, how we engage in missions, what strategy do we use. And in my this is just one scripture that I want to share with you, which is in Ephesians chapter 4. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he puts to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. For through him, we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. My understanding is that becoming a Christian, it doesn't end with our own personal salvation. It proceeds into reconciling two groups into one, reconciling other people groups into one adopted family of God. Yeah, and I hope that was very inspiring for you guys. I know there's only so much I can share in this very 1 hour webinar thing, webinar. But yeah, I hope this is just the start of conversations and further trainings that we could do to help empower and help Filipinos thrive in the context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ria. We do have us. I'll go straight to the question and answers so that we can still proceed to our breakout sessions later. Guys, feel free to add in if you still have questions, but I'll read the ones that are already here. The first question was, how do you suggest we reach out to a culture whose people in general look down on Filipinos?
That is a very interesting question. May I know who asked that question? Is it simple or no?
Rita was the one who asked it.
Yes. Rita, I have a chapter on my dissertation that talks about how Filipinos, how do we engage in missions when there's marginalization? Because from my understanding, when we Filipinos go into the global north, we always think that we're not threatening because probably of our skin, we're joyful, we're this. We have our own perception, understanding when we go into a global north or in different contexts. But we also have to understand that host cities have perceptions of immigrants that are coming in. So the question is, does your host city sees you as a missionary? Does it sees you as an immigrant? Does it sees you as the other? So these affects how you would engage missions in terms of moving out of, the Filipino context, right? So there's maybe that's something we can, take note, Lily, because that's a whole chapter we can discuss just in the context of what if, because that's a reality. We do experience marginalization in coming in wealthy nations. And I remember my first few appointments here in 2012, I was raising my partnership team. And one said, you're coming into America to become a missionary here. It was like a bizarre concept. But this was 10 years ago. And I said, yeah. Unfortunately, there was no partnership that happened during the meeting, but I was able to complete my team, and there are others who were behind me. And they're all non-Filipinos, who were behind me and when I became a missionary here. But yes, that's another interesting topic. I would love to discuss it with you guys.
I think another way of looking at it, because I hear this quite often from a lot of my Filipino friends, is that they feel intimidated. So I guess one personal question that I want to ask is, what are some practical tips that has helped you to not feel intimidated to minister to the culture that you are in?
There's a lot of revelation of God affirming my identity that is solely based on, me being a daughter of God, being created in the image of God. There's a lot of that in the process of seeing myself as equally created with others. So in my Missio Dei, the Imago Dei also has a huge chapter, because in my research and the scriptures, it just continues to reaffirm, me, who I am as created in the image of God. Because how I see that, how God sees me will affect how I see them. If God sees me as created in the image of God, then that's how I'll see them as created in the image of God. If there are other things that are influencing me of how I see myself, then it will also influence how I see others. There's this quote from, another interculturalist. He said, your opinion of your audience will determine how you talk. If you see your audience as an enemy, you will notice that the tone of your conversation is defensive, right? And this becomes a cyclical pattern. Well, that's how they see me. This is how I react. So in that chapter, I explained how it becomes a cyclical pattern, and we can't, we need to break that pattern. So we can't expect that change to happen from the outside. We can expect the change that happens within us. So how do I respond, even though they don't see me as, if they see me as a threat or as the other? How do I respond scripturally or in a godly way?
I love that. I think this ties up to that as well, in a sense that the question is, what are some practical ways to break our cultural biases? I guess this comes along with how you're seeing other people. Like, I know we can be particularly biased with a lot of things because of our exposure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the first part, I shared that we bring in our context to a specific setting. So if we're only meeting Filipinos, it will not be as obvious because we're used to it. But the more we engage with other culture, the more we realize how, oh, this is actually just my cultural preference. So the more we interact with other cultures, the more we will become sensitive to our own cultural orientation. And that's the thing. The scholars are talking about stereotyping. We have problems about stereotyping, negative or positive. The thing about stereotyping is that these are narratives that has been passed on from generations to generations. So for someone who hasn't met a Filipino, he will rely on the existing narrative that he has. Oh, Filipinos eat with their hands. And then he met a Filipino. I'm like, whoa, I thought you guys eat with hands. How come you're eating with chopsticks? You see, so because of the new interaction, there was a change in the narrative. So how do we break negative stereotypes? Be out there, engage with other cultures.
That's good.
Putting new interactions, bring in new narratives that will destroy whatever negative stereotypes we had towards each other. And I'm not just talking about Philippines, the global context, but this happens across different ethnicities.
Okay, that's very helpful. I think one more question is, what are the similarities or differences between intercultural and cross-cultural? I guess essentially, when do we say intercultural or when do we say cross-cultural?
Yeah, in the past, when you say cross-cultural, you are monocultural, and then you're going into one specific ethnicity or people group. So me as a Filipino, I'm going to be a cross-cultural missionary to a specific ethnic group in India. You're just crossing culture. That's why most of the trainings there, you study everything about the culture because you're trying to cross that one culture. When we talk about intercultural, this is a very globalized term because missiologists, they study the ebb and flow. We're mixed more and more. Maybe also because technology facilitated that, but there are 2 or more cultures, and that's intercultural. If you go to a diverse church, your C group is intercultural. 2 or more cultures or ethnicities are represented. That becomes intercultural because you're not just crossing one.
One last question before we go to our breakout. Are all Filipinos all high context, or is there a possibility that they are personally low context too?
In terms of different people groups, like I said, we can be high context in relation to London, Germany, US, but we are low context in relation to Japan and Korea or Vietnam or Indonesia. The thing about high context, here's actually one important note. Just because we're all high context, it doesn't mean that we're all gonna have like a smooth flow of communication. It's not. When we say high context, they have a specific shared experiences and values and background and history and humor. So each high context has its own pockets. Okay. So when we talk about, let's say, just the word family, family between high context and low context is very different. When I say family, your mental picture of family could have been like expanded into, I don't know, to the third cousin. Right? When I say family for low context, your direct original family. But even for family between Filipinos, India, Japan, they all have a different understanding of families. Because remember, these are shared experiences, shared history within that specific people group. Did I answer the question? What was like the last question?
That was a question that was sent to me as a message. I think you're
Okay.
able to answer all our questions. We're gonna go. Dan, can you help me with the breakout rooms? I
Yeah,
think we can have at
absolutely.
this. We can have at least 5 minutes for our breakout rooms. Ria, what's your question and action steps?
I mean, I've just learned that I'm the only person on this call that cares about the time, right? So, how long do you want it to be?
I know we didn't start the presentation on time. That's why it went a bit extended.
Yeah.
So yeah, if for people who really needed to go, feel free to go. But I was thinking if we can have at least 4 minutes
No, what I'm saying is,
or at
if
least
you want
five
longer, we can
minutes.
do longer.
Oh, okay. I think let's have a 5 minute breakout rooms and then come back for the last instruction and feedback.
Okay.
Ria, do you wanna ask your question and action steps for everybody?
Oh, yeah. I don't have a slide for it, but my question is like, what is your biggest takeaway from the webinar? And if you have a specific action step that you would like to discuss within the group, like a personal revelation, I think I'm leaning towards this. And my next step is, in order to move to an intercultural setting, is to do this. So what is your biggest takeaway and your practical action step to move from point A to point B?